Olas Media. Olas Media presents Cannabis Enlightened. Now here's your host, Dr. Leroy Brady.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Cannabis Enlightened. I am your host, Dr. Brady, and today we have a very interesting guest with us today. I met Michael at a conference here in San Diego over in Coronado at the Lowe's Hotel, and we had been catching each other's eye during the conference for at least a day or two with the knowledge that, I need to talk to that person. They probably got something to share that I need to know. And lo and behold, once we were able to connect, we found out that we had a lot in common and a lot to share with each other. So I asked Michael if he would honor me with a podcast, and he agreed to it. So I have Michael with me today. And Michael, I'd like you to start off by introducing yourself so that the listening audience knows who you are and a little bit about what you're all about.
Absolutely. First and foremost, thank you so much, Dr. Brady, for inviting me onto your platform, Cannabis Enlightened. I hope that I may also leave here enlightened as well, even though I'm a guest. But I'm honored to be here, and I'm thankful. To the listeners, my name is Michael Lawson Jr. I am the founder and CEO of Cannabis Media Collective, which is a cannabis education platform where we are transcending the current cannabis narrative. And we're going to bring an academic and intellectual spin to cannabis and educate the consumers on the science and data behind cannabis wellness. That's what I'm doing now, but there was a tremendous journey that I've embarked on that has brought me to this place. And I'm happy to get into it with you, Dr. Brady.
Thank you for being so gracious with your time today. I understand you're coming to us from another state.
Yes,
you're in Georgia?
Yes, indeed. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. Hailing from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a graduate of Morehouse College, 2005. I arrived here in 2001 via Los Angeles. I'm a Los Angeles native. I like to call myself a child of the movement. I was 13 years old when Proposition 215 passed. And so I've seen this evolution of the cannabis plant as a consumer and just in commerce, in the market in general. And I came to Atlanta to attend Morehouse and fell in love with the city and got married, started a family. Well, actually had my kids back in LA. That's a whole different story. But I spent the majority of my adult life here in Atlanta. And it's been a tremendous journey, even watching the cannabis culture evolve from 2001 to 2022. It's just amazing. But along the way, I got my master's in clinical mental health counseling with a focus in school counseling. And so I spent some time working in the school system, but I was disappointed that there's not much counseling that's actually happening in the schools. It's more administrative attendance type of duties. And so I transitioned into community counseling and worked as an MST therapist. This was multi-systemic therapy, working with youth and juvenile justice in DeKalb County Juvenile Court, and had some tremendous experiences there dealing with young people on probation, using the cannabis plant to medicate and cope with trauma, but putting themselves at risk for prison time, for a probation violation. And so the need for cannabis education in all sectors of education, healthcare, criminal justice is tremendous. And so I'm more than passionate about that. I feel like I've been called to this mission, and that's what I do.
That's an interesting statement you made, that you feel like it's a calling. Generally, I hear that when people are going into the ministry or something.
Right.
So that's very fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about your journey into this space?
Absolutely. I think since we have the time, I'll start from the beginning. I think my first introduction to this plant was in ninth grade, just using it recreationally with some friends. Wasn't really blown away by the effects. I was an athlete at the time, so in high school, I really didn't use cannabis on a regular basis or even really recreationally. I used it here and there with friends, but even though it was around all the time and everywhere we went as just youth growing up in Southern California, I didn't really get into it until I got to college. And but let me back up.
Sure.
So 1996, 1996, I was on a field trip, uh, school field trip from Escuela de Montessori was the name of the school. And on that field trip, unfortunately, friends of mine and me included, we witnessed a shooting.
Oh my.
And I'm sorry, this wasn't 96, this is 93, because I remember I was 10 years old. So at 10 years old, witnessing a murder has a tremendous impact on the mind of a 10-year-old boy.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't really begin to understand this until I was actually studying for my master's, fast forward in 2011, and began to understand that over the course of my youth, and in particularly when I was in college, and even then, I was struggling with symptoms of post-traumatic stress, insomnia, sleep disturbances. And so when I began to understand this, I also began to understand why cannabis was such an influence in my life later in my college years. So I tell that story just to give some background, to say that for a long period of time, I was medicating in my college years, dealing with trauma that had never been addressed. And it was
very good.
right. And it was my college years. I'll never forget, in 2002, I was headed to the library, and I had a little bit of a joint left from earlier. And so I smoked it. And at that time, little did I know, I was microdosing cannabis. And so as I microdosed this cannabis before I went into the library, this particular night, I noticed I was super focused. I was in there for about 4 hours, but it felt like it was 2 hours. Got so much work done. And I was thinking to myself, what's different from last night and tonight? And I was like, wow, it was the weed I smoked. But I said, I only smoked a little bit. And it was that moment that I realized, okay, I can use this plant by microdosing to help me focus and get things accomplished, in my daily life or any particular objective. And so it was, I tell that story to basically say that it was my college years where my academic and intellectual interest in the plant really began, when I really started to understand that this is way more than recreational. This is a plant that can heal the mind and the body. And by the time I started my master's degree, I also discovered that the plant is tremendously misunderstood in the mental health field. Anybody studying mental health in the past couple of years knows that when you study the literature, it's basically telling you, stay away from the plant. It'll immediately cause psychosis. It's bad for us. Leave it alone. Matter of fact, it needs to stay criminalized. And so that's the rhetoric in the mental health space. And I knew that was wrong, but I didn't know what to do about it. Right. And so this is circa 2011, 2013, where now my mind is starting to understand this plant in a whole different dimension. And then fast forward to 2016, I had major sinus surgery. And these are kind of landmarks in my life, in my cannabis journey.
Sure.
And so 2016, I had three major operations. My anesthesiologist leans over and literally whispers in my ear. He says, have you ever heard of CBD? I think you're really going to want to try to get a hold of some, because it's going to help with your inflammation and your recovery. And just try to look into that. whispers this in my ear. Now, at the time, I'm very familiar with CBD. I had never used it for pain or anything in particular, but I was aware of it. I knew about it, but I didn't know how to get any of it. And so I go through this operation. The next day, I'm in terrible shape. I am just completely beat up. I reach out to this gentleman, and he's a ghost. I can't find him. Call his office, email, all means of communication are coming up empty. Actually went to his office trying to catch up and couldn't find him. Long story short, I had a mentor, Dr. Uma Donabala in Boston, and she connected me with someone who got me some CBD and was able to instruct me on how to dose it, on how to use it, when to use it, how to use it, et cetera. And my recovery, according to my doctors, was phenomenal. Of course, I don't have a baseline to compare it to, but the point of the story is this gentleman gave me some tremendously valuable information that was critical to my healing process. And who's to know, I would have had a decent recovery without the CBD. But this gentleman gave me some tremendously valuable information that I could do nothing with, right? He told me what I needed, but I couldn't find out where to get it, couldn't find out how to use it, and so on and so forth. And it was that moment that I realized, not only do we need, and I've had this experience in the criminal justice system as a therapist. I've been in the community watching people heal themselves with cannabis for almost 20 years. And now I'm a patient recovering from a serious operation, and I'm in the dark on what to do. And I realized then that my lane and my passion and my purpose is really to educate people on how to use this plant to improve their quality of life, and I'm the type of person where I use cannabis, but I'm not the one to force it on anybody else or any of your listeners, right? I'm a big proponent of people having the information and the data so that they can make their own informed decision on what to do.
As you tell the story, you are mentally and almost physically reliving exactly what happened during that time, and that's amazing. I want to go back to the incident, the shooting that you witnessed when you were, I think you said 10 years old.
Right.
It appears, because there was PTSD, that you didn't fully work through that, or someone didn't help you to work through it. It was just a thing that happened, and you were supposed to move on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's actually remarkable when I think about it, because I think about it often. Usually only a day or two will go by where I might not think about it. But, and just to give some background to the listeners, we're 20 kids showed up at this park, Westchester Park. I think it's the park that's furthest west in Los Angeles County. It might be one of the last parks before you get to the beach. So we're not talking about a poor community or in the inner city. We're in the city of LA, but we're in Westchester, moving towards the beach, right? And so this is a good neighborhood we were on this field trip on. Westchester High School was down the street. As we approached the playground, we were kind of on a hill. And long story short, it looked like a fight was going to break out. So naturally, I'm very observant. I'm kind of nosy. I'm paying attention. And it wasn't a fight. A guy just pulled out a gun, pointed at the other guy, and shot him in the head. And then everybody ran.
Wow.
And right. And so I'm 10 years old. I'm processing this. But what was interesting to me as an adult, not interesting, but unfortunate as an adult looking back, is, it was a very small private school that we were on this field trip. So it wasn't like a public school type of huge gathering type of environment. It might have been 15 to 20 kids. But when we all scattered, because we all came there in our personal vehicles. So we all scattered, got in the cars, went back to the school, but no one ever mentioned this to the parents, right?
You're kidding.
I guess teachers maybe assumed that nobody saw it, or, they weren't paying attention or anything, but the narrative never made it back home. So my parents never asked me about it.
Wow.
My parents never asked me about it. I never mentioned it to them. As a kid, when I'm thinking back, I kind of just remember like, well, sooner or later, they're going to ask me like, what happened at the field trip? Long story short, the first time I had a conversation with my father about this incident, Um, I was 25 years old.
My gosh. Are you telling me 15 years later is when you were able to first discuss it with your dad? Oh my goodness.
15 years later.
Wow.
Now working as a therapist, having processed this over these years, finally coming to the point where I realized, like, I need to inform my parents on this experience that I've had, that they are completely unaware of. And the even crazier part is, along the way, I was a kid, so I couldn't keep that bottled up. So I talked to my friends about it. I would talk to, I remember mentioning it to a couple of adults, but they didn't take me seriously. They were like, "Oh, you didn't see that. Oh, you're just kidding." Because at the time, to give people some background, I'm living in Ladera Heights in Los Angeles. My parents are Harvard educated, hardworking folks. So I think coming from that background, when I shared that story with a lot of people, maybe they thought it was unrealistic that I would be exposed to something of that sort or whatnot. But long story short, it was something that I just kind of carried with me over the years. And that wasn't the only, act of violence that I witnessed. I was just the first. But it was definitely something that over a decade, I had no real understanding, really 2 decades of really how it impacted me on a subconscious level, And so fast forward, when I got to Morehouse College, anybody that knows about Morehouse and Spelman, Morris, Brown, Clark, Atlanta, and Atlanta University Center, let's just be honest, it's not in the best neighborhood. Now, recently it's been developed and the area is gentrified and it looks beautiful now. But anybody from the 90s and the early 2000s will tell you, the AUC Center was surrounded by, inner city projects and just a rough neighborhood. And that's being polite. So even as college students, we witnessed shootings, seeing people shot and killed near campus, on campus. And so when I came to Morehouse and was exposed to that, I think it really set me back in my process of really dealing with the trauma that I experienced as a child. Fast forward to what we're talking about in this podcast, cannabis has, I would be close to saying, almost saved my life, giving me the ability to sleep and get a good night's rest, the ability to focus, mood regulation. And when I started using cannabis with intention and with purpose, my GPA never fell below 3.5. You can look at my transcript. From the moment I started using this plant in a very intentional and purposeful way, I performed very well in school. Not to say that that's going to be everybody's outcome.
Sure.
However, it's possible. It's possible. And I think, and I'm a huge proponent of that. And, I think this plant is medicine that is used recreationally, and I want us to get back to the medical.
I like the word you use with that, that it's medicine, because so many people think otherwise. So many people think it is the way the federal government has categorized it as a Schedule I illicit drug of no particular benefit to human beings.
Which we know is a lie.
Yes, yes.
Which we know is a lie.
Absolutely, absolutely. The PTSD that you had when you were 10, it sounded to me like it kind of like continued into your high school, into your college, and it kind of was packing. I visualized as you told the story of packing, bricks on top of bricks on top of bricks on top of bricks, and almost until the point where you were almost at a breaking point here.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Because, more importantly, when I look back on my childhood, I don't think, the trauma, when I look back on it, it affected my mentality more than anything else. Even growing up in a household with 2 super educated, super successful parents, witnessing that at the age of 10 shaped my mentality to believe, that's going to be my outcome. One day that's going to happen to me, sooner or later, right? And then growing up in Los Angeles, being exposed to different things, having peers and friends your age passing away, you develop this mentality. I mean, it's well known in our community, that we, some of us grow up not thinking that we're going to live past 21, 25, et cetera. And that was my mentality, honestly, until I got into my counseling program and realized, wow, me witnessing that shooting was a big deal, and really framed my perspective on life for a significant period of time. And is powerful. And so yes, absolutely. I think the post-traumatic stress was just compounded year after year. And then, you have these different milestones in your life. I remember in 2003, July 6th and July 8th. July 6th, a close friend of mine, Jeff Nicholson, was killed on Sunday. Then a good friend of ours, Brandon Bennett, was killed 2 days later on Tuesday. Two totally unrelated, didn't know each other, situations were not related at all. But when you're dealing with that kind of violence, and I didn't witness those particular instances, but just to explain how the mentality grows, and it's hard to escape over an extended period of time, it's powerful. But the cannabis plant has the ability to, I'm not going to sit here and say reverse that, but definitely mitigate that.
But help you to deal with
Without
it.
this,
Would you say that?
absolutely,
Help you to deal
absolutely,
with it. Okay.
absolutely. The cannabis plant, 100%, I think is beyond a coping mechanism. I think it's a healing mechanism, right?
I like
And I
that.
think the
Yeah.
way that it interacts with our endocannabinoid system, it helps balance us in a number of different ways, physiologically, and psychologically. And I'm a firm believer that I think when the plant is used in the right way and it's used intentionally, that's what it can do.
Is your feeling that the getting therapy and using the cannabis was like the way that helped you move on from these experiences?
You know, Me in particular, not necessarily, because I didn't actually get therapy until I was doing my master's program.
Okay.
So I had been using cannabis for many years, before I was even exposed to counseling and psychotherapy. But to answer your question, I do believe that cannabis should be used in conjunction with psychotherapy to help people achieve their objective, right? And that's all it's about at the end of the day. It's about, is the client achieving whatever the sought out objective is? And I think cannabis is a tool that can play a major role in that, right? When we're talking about basic needs here. We're talking about sleep, right? We're talking about safety, and not that cannabis makes you safe, but it's just in terms of basic needs. But having a good night's sleep is essential to your daily health and just overall well-being, right? And so when we're talking about people dealing with trauma or any number of issues, chronic pain, name an issue that interrupts a person's sleep, and cannabis can change their life, right? People that have sleep disturbances or 1 or 2 hours of sleep, or dealing with that, they know how refreshing 7 to 8 hours of sleep is, right? And we know this plant can change the lives of millions of people, and sleep is just one issue.
The very important word that you brought up a few minutes ago, that is a balance, that it brought a balance to your life that you could, I would imagine, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you were able to deal with life from an objective manner, rather than just going through life, just, looking at it from, oh man, the world's coming to an end. I'm not going to be able to amount to anything. You were more balanced, that you could deal with life.
Absolutely, absolutely. When and I like to think about it as like mood regulation, right?
Good.
Even some people subjectively will report, an indica strain will have them feel a certain way, where a sativa dominant strain will have them feel much more upbeat and much more energized.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. I think I've used cannabis on a number of occasions, just to overcome pessimism, right, and thoughts of being a failure, um, negative thinking. You know, the cannabis plant. We've been taught over the years that it's addictive, it's harmful, when in fact it's really the opposite. You know, and when you look at the data, for instance, um, every state that had an opioid problem, when medical cannabis was introduced to that state, the data clearly shows the rate of opioid overdose, the rate of opioid use, it all decreases, right? And so this plant is actually an exit drug as opposed to an entrance drug, as we've all been educated over the years that, you know, cannabis is the first drug you use before you do crack and coke and heroin and all these other hard drugs, quote unquote. When, as you mentioned earlier, some of these substances are not even Schedule I substances.
Yes.
Right. But the government is sitting here telling us that this plant has no medical value, when in fact the government had the first patent on cannabis medicine. So, you know, this miseducation behind prohibition has happened for so long and has been so vast. You know, I think that's another reason why I think my platform is solving a major problem in the cannabis education space. You know, a lot of people, even in today's society, are still operating from this Harry Anslinger, FBN, J. Edgar Hoover paradigm, where we need to get rid of this plant and criminalize everyone. And those days are over. And so now we need to get educated on the science and the data and the information that can actually help us, you know, rather than hurt us.
Stay with us. We'll be back with more Dr. Leroy after this quick break. You're listening to Cannabis Enlightened on the Olas Media Podcast Network.
American democracy's good, but we can make it better. The National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers includes organizations across the country who are working right now to build a better democracy by opening primaries, implementing safe, secure voting systems, reducing corruption, and increasing transparency. Listen to our weekly podcast, How to Win Friends and Save the Republic, to hear updates from the latest movements in the democracy reform space. Subscribe and learn more about us at nonpartisanreformers.org.
You're listening to Cannabis Enlightened on the Olas Media Podcast Network. Now, here's your host, Dr. Leroy Brady.
I really think, Michael, your story is going to be helpful to a lot of people because out there's the narrative that people that use cannabis, and they don't call it cannabis many times, they use the M word that I don't like to use, are not educated.
I hate that word.
Not educated. They come from a broken family. Their parents aren't educated. And it's just an escape leading to something more serious. But you are the exact opposite. Your parents were, I think you mentioned Harvard educated?
Yes. And my father went to Harvard Law School and my mother went to JFK School of Government.
Wow. That's magnificent. And because of the experiences that you went through as a young child, you experienced PTSD. And even though that happened, you were able to still achieve, but you still felt that you were being held back by some of the things that you experienced when you were young. And through the cannabis, it sounded like you were able to move ahead. And I think the example you gave a little bit ago is that you went into the library and thought it was 2 hours, and it was actually 4 hours.
Literally.
And your grades improved.
Literally.
Now, I know neither one of us are advocating that someone should start taking cannabis to improve their grades, but it is well worth, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, looking into the data, doing some research, and looking at it as something for
Absolutely.
yourself and not just, I'm going to take this. This is like peanut butter. I'm going to spread it all over the bread, spread it on my life. I'm just going to take it and the
Right.
best is going to happen. That's what we're not saying. We're not saying that. But
Right.
it can,
Absolutely.
as in your particular case, it did help you to overcome some mental difficulties.
Oh, most definitely. And that's what I think it's about. It's about focusing on using the plant in ways that enhance our daily living, right? That improve our quality of life. How do we deal with medical symptoms that are interrupting our daily life, right? You have people out here dealing with chronic pain every day, being nauseous from cancer medication. So the reality is, and what I think we're starting to understand is, our cancer patients, our terminally ill patients, um, epilepsy, autism, post-traumatic stress, um, all of these issues are solvable, and cannabis appears to be part of that solution if we use it in the right way, right? And so, like you're saying, my I've had it's funny you mentioned my grades, and you brought that back up because my father and I used to have that debate all the time, because he would say, "Man, are you still smoking weed?" And I'm like, actually, I am. And if you look at my transcript, my grades have actually improved. And, I'm focusing more on the library. And, you know, he wasn't as receptive to that as I would have liked. But the point of the story is I knew going into it, I'm going to use the plant. I'm going to use X amount of it. And I'm going to get into dosage in a second because I think that's important, right? Because we're talking about using cannabis for focus. Well, it's about using the right amount of cannabis, right? The conversation about dosage is really common with edibles, but it's not really discussed with flower. And so I became a complete cannabis nerd when I was in college. I got a scale and I would start weighing out, how much I was smoking and tinkering with it and seeing how much got me where. And so I have my own cannabis wellness routine where I know point 0.4 is going to really just uplift me, stimulate my mind, improve my mood, where if I up it to point 0.8, then I'm going to be very focused and very, very purpose driven on whatever my objective is at that moment. And then, if I go all the way up to a gram, that's usually what I use for sleep. Right. And so I became very intentional on how I use cannabis. So you're absolutely right. I'm not advocating that somebody uses cannabis, their grades are going to improve. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is somebody can use cannabis to improve their focus. And if they focus on their grades, then their grades will improve. Right. When I smoked that cannabis, I was spending hours in the library. I wasn't I hung out, of course, it's college, but in the instance we're talking about, I used it for focus. And so it's all about understanding how cannabis interacts with your body. I think we are all experts on our own cannabis wellness, because how the plant affects me, it might affect you differently. We can use the same dose at the same time in the same manner, and get different results. So as you mentioned, it's not something we can just spread around and hope it works for everybody.
It
But I
depends
think there
upon,
is an
yeah,
intelligent way to approach it.
right. It depends upon your own body. I like the way you ran down how you measured it out, and that's something that if you're using cannabis, you have to do that for yourself. You can't do it and say
Yes.
to your buddy, okay, this is what you ought to do. This is how much you can do.
Right.
Everybody is different.
Absolutely. You can't rely on what your neighbor, what your partner, what your spouse, what your friend does. You can't rely on their program to work for you. It just doesn't work like that.
Right.
My wife, for instance, she needs like the smallest amount ever to get
Mm.
an effect. I'll leave a gram around for her, and 3 weeks from now, there'll still be a little bit of that gram left.
Yeah.
Left. And
Mhm.
so she knows that she needs my wife knows she needs very little caffeine. Very little cannabis. And we've also discovered that with her, caffeine and cannabis are not a good mix.
Ooh.
Right. And so everybody needs to figure out what works for them. But the beauty of this plant is that as you use more or less, it's not going to harm you in any significant way. We
Mhm.
know this from thousands and thousands of pages of research and hundreds of years going back to the Chinese. There has not been a cannabis overdose yet to be recorded.
Mhm.
Not
That's
to
true.
imply or suggest that anybody use a tremendous amount of it. But the point is, you can experiment with small doses and still come out with a favorable outcome, is what I'm saying.
Good
And
point.
that's all we're talking about. Is
Excellent point.
can
Excellent point.
can a human being use cannabis and get the desired outcome that they want?
Mhm.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Whether it's sleep, whether it's studying, whether it's being social, whether it's pain, whether it's something as serious as seizures, or whether it's something like anxiety. The reality is this plant is so versatile, and is not harmful to the point where we can experiment with it to find out how to best use it in our lives. And I
Exactly.
think that's one of the most beautiful things about the cannabis plant.
Very well put. Michael, can we talk for a few minutes about your organization? Because I was fascinated with how you came about your organization and what you see for the future in it. I know you talked a little bit at the beginning about it, but I really think the listening audience is interested in what you're doing. What are you putting together, and what does this mean to cannabis industry?
Absolutely. My plan is to really shake up the cannabis education space. I see that as the next frontier in the cannabis industry. I think if you look at not all, but if you look at most aspects of the supply chain, I feel like they're a little crowded, right? When you go from cultivation, from seed to sale, I think a lot of people are focused on production. I mean, which we need, because without cultivation, there is no industry. Um, but when I mention those milestones in my life, my experience in college in the library, my experience as a therapist working with youth, my experience of having that surgery and having nobody to turn to for advice. These events shaped my understanding that there are millions of people going through the same thing I experienced that
Exactly.
have no resources.
Right.
Right. And so that's that's kind of the genesis of this concept in my mind. But then I also realized that even, and I was just talking about consumers, but the education is needed for consumers. It's needed for medical professionals. We have medical professionals in this space who are not familiar with the endocannabinoid system,
True.
right? So they're not even recommending cannabis to their patients as an option over synthetic medications, where you got a pill for the side effect pill for the side effect pill. So as I began to grow in this space, I began to understand, okay, as a consumer, we need to be educated. As a medical professional and as a doctor, we need to be educated. Um, our decision makers and policy makers in criminal justice and politics need to be educated, because they're making decisions that are framing the of millions of people's lives, right? And so with understanding all that, I said, well, what am I going to do? So I first started off when I was thinking small years ago. I was working at a nonprofit. Shout out to Brotherhood Crusade in Los Angeles, doing wonderful work in the community. And I was thinking to myself, what am I going to do in this cannabis space? I want to educate people. I have this story. I have this information. I have this experience. And I want to do something. So I said, I'm going to write a book. So my first thought was, I'm going to write a book. Slowly but surely, I realized, like, that's not substantial enough. That's not going to reach enough people. And fast forward in time, I ended up bumping into when the pandemic up running into Brandon Chris, my CTO. And I shared this, part of my story that I'm sharing here on this podcast. We had a conversation, and he was the missing piece that came to me and said, hey, this is a subscription-based education platform that we need to build. And this is how we access all of these demographics that you're talking about. And so the vision came about. Cannabis Media Collective is an education platform that is going to change the cannabis narrative by educating people on the science and the data that you and I are familiar with, but that the average citizen is unaware, and needs to be aware. But on top of educating the consumers, I want my platform to be one of the preeminent cannabis education sites where you have access to all cannabis resources, so that all of the doctors from all over the globe, from all continents, can come to Cannabis Media Collective, create educational content, have it live on the platform, and be a resource for everyone in the community. So when consumers, when professionals, when industry leaders, politicians need access and information to data in this space, I want them to come to Cannabis Media Collective, because I think we have an opportunity to expose critical information that can be life-changing for millions of people. And not to mention, I also feel like it's my duty to bring as many people into this space that I can. I think that you and I, if you look at where we are in this point in history, we are cannabis pioneers, right? We are the first of this time in history to enter in a legal cannabis market, that for almost a century we've been under this darkness of prohibition. And so when people look back 50, 100 years from now, they're going to be able to see what work we've done. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I have created a platform that I plan to live beyond my years. Like my mother always says, you have to plant seeds where trees will grow that you will not enjoy the shade. And so this is, my vision is for the next generation of, I like to call cannabis creators, because now we have a whole new industry that has been spawned. When you talk about ancillary businesses, when you talk about cannabis accounting, cannabis taxes, cannabis architecture, cannabis design, cannabis tech, all of these other sectors in the cannabis space are going to evolve, and they're going to grow. And people are going to need to learn on how to develop skills to adapt to how this market is going to grow. And so Cannabis Media Collective is going to be a platform and a source of information for citizens all over the world. And that's what I'm building. Yeah.
So no, I was just going to say that I know there are people that when they listen to this, they're going to get excited, and they're going to say, I want to get on that boat. I want to get in that raft. I want to be on that island to create this with Michael. How would they get in touch with you? Can you give the listening audience some contact information?
Oh, no problem. My pleasure. Anyone can reach me at Michael at cannabismediacollective.com. So that's CANNABISMEDIACOLLECTIVE.com. And the platform is cannabismediacollective.com. So you can also go to the website, check us out, log in, add your email and contact information, and we can reach out to you. You can also find us at Instagram at _CM Collective _. You can reach us there. And you can also reach us on our YouTube channel, Cannabis Media Collective.
Okay. And are those also good contact pieces for people that want to just talk with you about their experience that might be the same as your experience?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. People feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, Michael at cannabismediacollective.com. I'm personally looking to recruit doctors, scientists, cannabis professionals that have any particular skill set where they have data that's valuable that they want to share with the people. I want to create content with you. I want to interview you. I'm going to have you on my show, Dr. Brady. Get a CMC interview with you because I'd love to pick your brain and your experience and your journey. I wish we had more time, but absolutely, I'm an open book. I love to share any information that I have, any time that I have, and most certainly looking to connect with all cannabis educators and cannabis creators out there looking to tell their story, have their story told, and develop some educational content for the people so that we can be enlightened on cannabis wellness.
Absolutely. And I'd be more than happy to join you on whatever stage you're going to develop. If it's a podcast, if it's a panel, whatever you want to do, I'll be there. Just give me a heads up and I'll set things in motion to be there to assist you. And on that note, I want to really thank you for being so gracious with your time and the information that you've shared with the audience. I'm sure that people are going to be, I'm going to use my own word, enlightened by the experience that you have gone through and by what you're doing now in the space. As you mentioned, I'll use your word, pioneer in the cannabis education space. I think that's tremendous. And once again, I want to thank you for being with us.
No, I want to thank you for the invitation. This is very special to be blessed with the opportunity to share my story. If it affects one person, we're doing a great job. And I just thank you for your time as well. And I look forward to coming back because there was a lot to unpack in a short period of time. And so I look forward to hearing what your listeners have to say. And I look forward to coming back and having another conversation.
Well, I'm going to take that to mean you're going to give your time in the future. Once you get your organization going, come back and tell us what has happened as a result of this podcast and what you're doing in general in your collective. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
If you'd like to hear more Cannabis Enlightened with Dr. Leroy, be sure to visit us online at cannabisenlightened.com and subscribe wherever you download your podcasts. Cannabis Enlightened is produced in San Diego, California, and presented by March and Ash at marchandash.com. On behalf of Dr. Leroy, I'm Chris Cantori, and thank you for listening.